All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so I do want to get started. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Austin, for hosting today. I want to introduce Austin Purvis. He's our solutions engineer, specialist in configuring, price and quoting, um, CAD automation, all the good things that Tacton can provide. He is our one of our top experts here, so we thought we'd bring him on and answer some top questions that we get and open up the floor to you guys if you have any questions about how these projects work, um, maybe a use case you've thought of, or yeah, anything that's floating to the top of mind. Just throw it out there. We have a Q&A panel that you can put your questions in. Just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items of what's coming up. Just the next few KVAs, we've got Tales from the Vault, Nightmare Scenarios, and Data Management. Those are going to be fun. In a kind of scary, spooky season here, we're going to be talking about companies that we've dealt with, right, that have encountered some major issues because they didn't have the right protections in place or the right methodologies. So just kind of walking through those, and hopefully, again, people will share some of their scenarios as well. On the 14th, we're bringing Graham back for modeling heat flow inside of motors using ANSYS simulations. He's going to be using a few different ANSYS solvers to get that work done, to show how they can all work differently to model these flows. And then on November 21st, we're bringing John Kuda, one of our top specialists on business transformation. He's going to be covering the 10 best practices for manufacturers. So he's seen a lot of big projects. He worked at Autodesk for a long time. He's a really knowledgeable individual, so definitely come check him out. And if you're technical, this has always been a really popular asset with our audience, and we just rebuilt it for Vault 2025. We had our team go look it over, update it. We relayed it out. It's easy to consume. There's good links out to Autodesk supporting articles to get the work done. So definitely grab that QR code if you want to go grab that. It's a quick read and could help you have a more stable vault. So yeah, kind of back to the title slide here. We don't have a ton of slides because Austin's just here to kind of talk game on CPQ. So I'll hand it off to you, Austin. I think, let me see if you have any questions yet. Otherwise, I think you had some kind of top questions from things you hear a lot. So I'll just turn it over to you and you can get started.
Yeah, thanks, DJ. So I do have some common questions that I hear a lot, but if there is any burning questions you have, they can be as specific or vague as you want. If you want to go ahead and drop those in the question and answer panel at the bottom, feel free, and we'll be monitoring those. But for the most part, a little bit of background on me. I am the in-house expert on CPQ here at KETIV. So I'm on the pre-sale side, helping with some of the sales and talking to customers and learning what our customers are, how they're using CPQ and how to further use its capabilities to help them sell more products. But additionally, I'm also the integrations expert here in-house, so I help a lot with the integrations to customers' ERP systems and CRM systems, and there's been a lot of interesting use cases, but I really love talking about that as well. So again, if there's any questions, feel free to drop them in. But I have about 5 questions that I hear a lot, and just with examples, things like that. They're pretty high level, so there's nothing crazy specific that I've written down. But again, if you have anything specific, feel free to drop that in. So to start us off, I mean, basically, I like to start for anybody on the call that's new to CPQ and is just wanting a very high level intro to it. A lot of times, the first question customers ask are, what does CPQ even do? Why is it useful for me as a manufacturer in my quoting process? And, can it even handle the complex products that I create? So I think the big picture of it is CPQ helps automate complex quotes and saves your engineering team the time that they have to take to look over quotes, make sure they're accurate, go in and ensure validity of quotes. And so CPQ, and specifically Tacton CPQ, which is what we implement here at KETIV, it can take your quotes from being from having a lot of manual touches. So being in Excel and having to go, go to a portal and find out the pricing, or maybe go to your enterprise resource planning system, your ERP, and find the lead time, things like that. And it can bring it all together in one system so that when a sales rep or a customer is configuring your products, it pulls all that together, it calculates the prices, and produces a valid product configuration based on inputs. So, an example of this is we've worked with conveyor companies before, and specifically one of them that we work with, they have hundreds of variations that the users can input for their conveyor, such as the length, the width, the speed that it's going, and then CPQ ensures that there's a feasible quote that is spit out of that. So what that's done for them is that's significantly decreased their quote time, because they used to have to go through, they'd open up an Excel, they'd put different line items on everything that they needed, the length, the width, and they'd have to hand it to engineering. They'd have to pull all the parts they need from the ERP, and engineering would have to touch it. They'd be taken off projects. And so then you know, just the process was a long time to get a quote out the door, and implementing a CPQ system allowed for the sales reps to actually do the quotes all by themselves. So they knew they were coming out with a valid quote. Engineering didn't have to check it over unless it was a very special request. And so now, they were able to automate, quotes that are pretty complex. The other big reason that customers really benefit and companies benefit from implementing a CPQ solution is the error reduction. So I've heard a lot, and one of the ROIs that we go through with potential customers is, how will fixing a lot of the errors that you have in quotes, give you a better ROI? And that's usually the biggest driver. So there's pushing more quotes out the door, but also a lot of customers eat the cost when they make an error on the quote. They sell it to the customer, they sign everything, and then it goes over to engineering, and engineering, catches an issue, and they either have to go back and ask for more money, which is never a good customer experience, or they just have to eat the cost themselves. And so we work with a valve manufacturer that we implemented Tacton CPQ for, and it eliminated a lot of the quoting errors they had. We were using some, performance curves to make sure that they were doing valid configurations. And before, they used to have to just do all the math in Excel. And now Tacton is only offering the valves that are allowed in the system, based off the requirements that the customer puts in. So CPQ does a great job reducing those errors down to, I would say, almost nothing, because you're only allowed to enter in valid configurations. And then the last part of, or not the last, but a big, selling point, or the reason to implement CPQ, is it brings a lot of your essential tech systems, your whole tech stack, together. So I mentioned ERP, enterprise resource planning. A lot of customers use that to track their materials and their lead times and maybe their pricing. We can pull that into CPQ. And so I always like to tell customers, I like to let systems that are built for certain purposes do what they're good at. And so CPQ is really good at configuring products, and it can get the pricing and the quoting correct, and make these really nice proposals. And it can hold lead times and materials and parts, but I like to leave that for ERP systems. And so what CPQ and Tacton CPQ specifically is really good at is bringing in data from an external system like an ERP, like those lead times, and then using that data to create a constrained product and something that is valid for you to build. And the other thing, another common use case, is the customer CRM, customer relationship management tool. So think Salesforce, or Dynamics, HubSpot, and that's bringing in the customer data. So you can really make a smooth experience for your sales reps internally, if you can connect, and Tactom's good at this, but connect your CRM system. So I just set up one the other day where in Salesforce, the reps never actually have to go into Tacton. And what I mean by that, and they open up Salesforce, they go through the quote stage, and then there's an an iframe of Tacton within Salesforce. So there's no other portal they have to keep track of, or URL. They can just go in there, configure their products. It's pulling data from the ERP, maybe their PLM system, and it's bringing all the data together so that your sales reps and your team can create valid quotes for your customer. So I think that's just a high level of the quoting process, for CPQ, how it improves that quoting process for complex products. And I think just briefly touching on complex products, I haven't yet encountered a product that has been too complex for CPQ. I think the biggest hurdle I've seen with CPQ implementations is not organized data. So a lot of times it's tribal knowledge. So I think, that's one of the struggles that customers encounter a lot. And so we like to work with customers and try to pull that tribal knowledge out. And so we can actually tabulate it, put it down, create constraints and business rules around how your products are actually built so that we can put it into a CPQ system. But thus far, I haven't encountered anything that CPQ can't handle, which is really great because there's a lot of manufacturers we work with that create very complex products. So that was the first question I was kind of thinking of, and a common question I get, especially early in the sales cycle. I'm still seeing there doesn't seem to be any open questions. I think DJ, you might be monitoring that, but if anybody has questions for anyone new that's joined, feel free to put that in, and I'll do my best to answer that. So let's see, number two, how does Tacton CPQ integrate with CAD systems for automated design? Yes, so this is a big question I get, especially because a lot of customers come to us specifically looking for design automation. And Tacton Design Automation and Tacton CPQ are actually different. Tacton CPQ is for the sales team. Engineers can come in and approve quotes and things like that, and management can as well. But it's primarily a quoting tool that brings in your data from different platforms and allows you to configure a product. Tacton DA or design automation is a specific add-on to Inventor, Creo, or SolidWorks. And this is primarily for engineering. So engineers can open up, let's say, their SolidWorks instance, and they can go in and we can start to create different inputs that they can put in. And from that, it's directly mapped to certain models and assemblies and drawings, or not, I guess not the drawings generated afterwards, but it's mapped to those assemblies so that as you're choosing the different inputs you want, it makes that model live and is adjusting all the different dimensions and the different parts that are going in and out. So it streamlines engineers' ability to create models. But Tacton CPQ, just to even add a layer of complexity, makes it also has an integration with PTC Creo, SolidWorks, and Inventor, the three I mentioned, where you can actually map your configuration, the sales team, whenever they press, generate proposal, it can actually go and connect to one of those CAD systems and create the files on demand. It has a very similar functionality. It's just it's separate, and the sales team isn't going to see that. It's on usually a virtual machine, and you have a seat of one of those CAD softwares, and it's creating that dynamically, and then creating the drawing and maybe outputting some of the step files or things like that as well. So I like to kind of continually use some examples, but we had a customer that created cooling systems, and one of their big asks, they wanted to create 3D models of the custom configurations that customers were asking for. So their customers would come in, put in the inputs that they wanted, and then they would request a quote. And what that would do is historically, the company would have to hand that off to an engineer. The engineer would look at the requirements, and then they would open up Inventor in this case. They'd drag the models in, they'd adjust them and make sure that they fit together and that they were validated. Whereas now, after they implemented Tacton CPQ with a CAD integration, which is built into Tacton, it's not extra. They were able to, as soon as the customer pressed, submit for a quote, it triggered the CAD system to start thinking about the inputs that were placed into Tacton. So Tacton validated that it was an accurate configuration, passed it off to the CAD system, Inventor, and then Inventor was able to spit out 3D models, drawings, and so it saved hours of manual work that was previously done by engineers. A couple other, I guess, small things, but very valuable. There's multiple CAD formats that are supported. So I mentioned SolidWorks, PTC Creo, and or PT Creo, and Inventor, and also supports exporting and anything you can imagine from those specific programs. So. And then the last thing is it also is able to do those technical drawings. So a lot of customers have the templates that they want to use. It's their kind of just standard that their customers are used to seeing, and their engineering team is able to or is used to using. And so after you've created the models, or after Tacton's created those CAD models, it's able to output technical drawings that can be sent out to suppliers. It can be sent out for quotes to other companies that you're needing to, and you can even give it to your customers that if that's something that you is common in your business practice. So that's kind of the overarching, just how does Tacton CPQ integrate with CAD systems? I basically, all that being said, I like to just end that question with, yes, there's a lot that can be done with Tacton connected to these CAD systems. And so again, I've seen a lot of value for customers that I've worked with when they've done this in their workflow and utilizing Tacton. Okay, so let's see, I have a couple more questions that I've written down as common questions that I get in the sales cycle, but even this specific question is more in the sales cycle. But I wrote down, what kind of flexibility does Tacton CPQ offer for customization? And this is actually, I really like this topic a lot, especially since I've worked at a few other CPQ platforms, and they're all different. They all have strengths, they all have weaknesses. But Tacton CPQ, one of its biggest strengths is the customization. And what I mean by that is it's an object oriented. So there's standard objects that come in Tacton CPQ. You're able to have a quote, have accounts, have opportunities. You have quote products where you can configure your actual products and add business logic into that. But on top of that, Tacton allows you to define as many custom objects as you want. And an example of this is I had a customer who creates cabinets, and they wanted to be able to calculate accurate delivery times. And so when they did that traditionally in their Excel, they would actually go get the average price of gas because it changes and it's so variable. And they're trying to become more specific for how much deliveries are costing them and things like that. And so we actually made a custom object called gas prices, and we connected it to the Department of Energy's gas price API. And so we wrote a very simple integration. And so I think it's every morning at about 4 a.m., it queries that API and it pushes it over to the custom object. And so now that it's in Tacton, it can be used in their calculation of prices for delivery. It can be used throughout the platform, and just allowing customers to have full control over what they want to do and how they want to use the tool. So I thought that was really interesting. There's more that they want to expand it to, like pulling the gas prices by zip code and things like that. And so that's just one example of a custom object that's being utilized to help streamline the whole quoting process for customers. I mentioned for flexibility, you're able to create these product models and system models, which is how Tacton, how you model how your product can be configured. So there's constraints that are put in, and when you choose different attributes and user inputs, it constrains all the different options you have till you get down to a final configuration. And that's completely customizable. You can write pretty much as many constraints as you want. You can there's multiple different ways that you can write calculations in code. You can just Tacton has a lot of functionality with how you configure your products and how you set that up. And they're always innovating and coming out with new things of how to support manufacturers in that quest. The other thing is real-time price adjustments. Like I mentioned before, being connected to an ERP system, Tacton does a great job, and I always highly recommend if customers have an ERP and a CRM system to connect those to Tacton, because it just allows you to keep your pricing and your data in a single source of truth in the ERP, and then you can pull that into Tacton, utilize it, but it's still being updated in the ERP, so you don't have to update it in two places. But Tacton's completely flexible to customize those standard objects like I talked about before. So there's a price model object, and you can go in and you can add custom attributes under that object. So if, for example, maybe you have something in your ERP where you want to measure I'm trying to think of something that's not super standard, but maybe some sort of margin that's not the standard margin. It's maybe like a distributor margin on top of that, and it's not a really common thing to have in the price. You can easily add an attribute like that under your price list and track that in Tacton or bring that in from your ERP. So there's just a lot of ability to do what you want with the system. And then the last thing I like to touch on too is Tacton has a really extensive APIs where you can build you know, external facing applications. So we have customers that do more of a self-service configuration on their website. So their customers can actually go in, configure their own products, and it utilizes Tacton's engine, but it's being shown on their site. So it doesn't have to be a credentialed user or anything like that. They can just create a quick quote, ask for a request, maybe put in their name and email, and then the manufacturer can go in and see all the requests, and they can come in as leads, or they can respond to that quote however they want to. So example of this is we had I think it was a packaging company who made these like these custom packaging boxes, which don't sound that um, complicated, but I guess these customers would order lots of those at a time in different sizes. And so they actually implemented a self-service CPQ so their customers could come in, configure, and order everything online. And if it was within the bounds of Tacton and there were no flags raised for approval, it would just go right down to it would push right back to their ERP automatically and be converted to an order. So it just sort of allowed a much more streamlined sales process for them. And it looks like I have a question here from Michael. So he said, is there a connection to um, BIM systems? Can you please elaborate on that? So uh, I'm trying to remember BIM is let me just make sure I don't totally butcher this explanation because I'm trying to remember which one I was talking to the other day. Yes, okay, building information modeling. I was thinking for some reason in my head I had it as business intelligence. So yes, um, yeah, there we go. Michael's confirming for me. He said, "Yep, that's correct." So we actually have a lighting customer who we are helping, and they were just recently, I think this last week, asking us about their BIM system if we can connect. And the answer is yes. Obviously, it depends on the system and how complex that connection is. I'd be curious, Michael, do you have like a specific use case that you're thinking of, or you just want to kind of hear? I'm happy to just kind of more high level talk about what a connection like that would look like. If you do have anything more specific, please feel free to type in there. But on a high level, typically what I've seen, I haven't actually done an implementation with a BIM system yet, but I would assume that when you're designing in that system, and if you need to actually price that out, if it's maybe the dimensions of the building or and you're trying to figure out the products that need to go into there, you could have kind of create your okay, so Michael said more on the potential end uses. So a use that comes to mind is for this lighting manufacturer that we're working with. They model, or they have their buildings in their BIM software. I think it's Autodesk's BIM 360, and they are have their buildings in there, and so they're actually doing some of their elevation plans or I guess you'll have to excuse me for some of the butchering of the vocabulary, but they have their plans of where they want to put the lights and what the product is. And so what we're actually thinking about doing with them is once they plan out kind of what the lights are, they need to actually quote how much those are going to cost, and Tacton's already set up to calculate lead time and pricing and have a proposal for them. So what we're talking about doing is once they plan out, here's the lights that I want here and here and here, that it kicks them over to Tacton CPQ and they can actually go in and it's pre-selected, here's the products I need and maybe here's some of the dimensions, but then they can go in and customize them further. So they can say, I want to um, I want to have this level of power. I want to have this coloring for the lights. This is actually where you could configure it more. Maybe if you wanted more of a zigzag light, or you want some of them in parallel. And so that's kind of the idea. And so then once it's been handed off to CPQ, you can create your quotes and actually give a really valid quote to the customer. So I hope I don't know if I necessarily answer your question, Michael, but I think that's a potential use case that I'm thinking of. Um, if there's another industry that you're thinking of, I'm more than happy to talk about that. But thank you for that question. I think that's good. Um, we have here KETIV, something called KETIV Data Bridge, which is our um, middleware solution. And so if there's something that's not a built-in integration, so we have built-in integrations to um, we have built-in integrations to the CAD systems. We have built-in integrations to quite a few ERPs and CRM systems. But if there's anything not covered, KETIV, we have this middleware solution that utilizes the APIs um, that Tacton has to be able to pass information back and forth. So the BIM system that we were just talking about, we would potentially use something like that to be able to pass that data back and forth and make sure we have the correct webhooks to make sure to know when to trigger Tacton, when to trigger your BIM system. So thank you for asking that question, Michael. Really appreciate it. Number four. So I have two more questions. If there's any more questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. But this one's, I think, more high level, but it's how does Tacton CPQ help reduce time to market for manufacturers? And I think if you can have been on for the whole call, you know, it's the primary ways it does that is it allows quicker turnaround times on quotes. So instead of having to go to engineering and supply chain and all these different groups that might had to have touched it before, you get their knowledge on what makes a valid product, what engineering is looking for, all this, and you put this in Tacton so that whoever's using it, whether it's an end customer or your internal sales team, it's always going to be a valid quote. And so you can, we had I think there was a customer we had, I'm trying to remember what they made. Um, but they, went from taking, I think, days to turn a quote around because they had to hand it off to engineering and they had to get their approval and sometimes they'd be backed up to literally hours because the only thing that would take hours is they would configure it and then they would just have to wait for approval by management or something like that because they knew it was a valid engineered product because of the rules and the constraints that were intact on. Another way that there's a faster or reduced time to market is there's faster handover to production. So again, instead of having to wait on engineering to draw it up and then make sure it's valid for sales and have all this back and forth, if you have an integration to a CAD system or something like that, there's already engineering drawings. So you can hand a complete bill of materials and engineering drawings to your manufacturing floor, and they're able to create what has been configured and as a custom configuration from the customer. So I think that's really interesting and really powerful. And there's not as many bottlenecks, right? So if you only have a couple engineers on the team and they're really behind or it's a busy season, a lot of these tasks become more automated. So it frees up engineering to work on those very customized products that you have and frees them up from having to do those repeatable tasks that aren't necessarily hard, but they're more they just take up time. So I met with a customer the other day who she's in engineering and she said, when I create these custom quotes for, our standard products, I think she works in a conveyor, her products are conveyors. She said they're not hard, but, I know what she knows which conveyor to pick and what belt to pick and what motor to pick, but it takes time. She has to actually stop what she's doing and actually configure this quote real quick. And she said it only takes, 15, 30 minutes to do, but she has to do several a day. And that really decreases her productivity. And so Tacton CPQ or a CPQ system can help free up a lot of that time so that she doesn't have to keep pausing and creating this. And it empowers the sales reps or customer to create it all themselves. And since all the logic is already in CPQ. So that's a bit about how I've seen CPQ reduce time to market, and I've seen that be pretty powerful tool for people.
Yeah, very
And the
interesting.
last one, it's more of a challenge one. So what are some common challenges that manufacturers face when adopting CPQ, and how do you address that? So the biggest challenge I've seen is integrating with legacy systems. I've said, CPQ we have some built-in integrations, but we use that middleware to integrate with all sorts of systems. I mean, we've integrated with some legacy, on-prem solutions. It definitely was a lot more work, but it can be done. And Tacton CPQ's APIs are well documented. And so I guess it is a challenge, but with our expertise at KETIV, with working together with your teams and your IT teams or whoever is maintaining your legacy systems, I don't want to say there's no systems we can't integrate with, but I haven't found one that we haven't been if it hasn't an external link to the internet, whether it's on-prem or something like that. I've seen some really interesting things that our delivery team has been able to create to connect CPQ to different systems. So that's a challenge that I've seen manufacturers have. The other one is just user adoption resistance, and I think that's pretty typical of any new software. We're used to what we know, and we like it, and regardless of the challenges that are presented, we want to just continue with what we have. But CPU can offer some incredible benefits, and I think here at KETIV we offer training, support, and really I think if there's a lot of buy-in from the stakeholders and the people that are going to be using it, we do constant. If we're building the implementation for you, we do constant demos and things like that, and really try to cast vision on how this is going to be used for the team. And so that's definitely helped with the resistance to adoption. But there always is that kind of adoption to any software that's being implemented in a company, and I think it's just reiterating the goal of this is going to make our lives easier. It's going to decrease time for engineering. It's going to put more power in the sales reps' hands. It's going to be better for the brand as customers are going to have a more seamless and quick process to get a quote out. So I've seen that. And then the last thing is customization versus standardization. And that's a pretty common challenge for businesses, specifically when they're trying to implement CPQ, because it's finding the right balance between should we put this highly complex product line in CPQ, or should we maybe try to standardize it a bit more so that we can start getting value on an ROI on our investment into the software? And so Tacton's able to, like I said before, it's extremely flexible and able to have extensive customization while maintaining, that your configuration is valid and all of that, and having a nice proposal. But a lot of times, what I'll recommend is I'll say, hey, let's take a product line that you sell a lot, because that means you're really good at quoting it. It's pretty clear what are the constraints that you can do. You might have some off cases where you configure it in a way that has an exception or things like that. But I always recommend, like, let's take that product line that has high uh, man, I lost the word, but basically you sell a lot of them. And let's put that into CPQ, and let's try to standardize it and work with you in doing standard parts and figuring out what are the different constraints that you can actually put around this product line so that 80% of the quotes that your customers are making, it'll fit in this. And then we can put in flags and things like that so that when your customers do ask for something extremely custom, it can flag engineering and they can do some of the more manual processes to create it. And then over time, after you're getting ROI back on the CPQ, you can start to implement some of those exceptions and things like that. So CPQ can do it all, but I really like to recommend that businesses start with some of those more standardized product lines just to start to really get value, because it really I think it's just good to get that return on investment quickly. And so that's usually what I recommend. But that's always the challenge that businesses have is should I really just go all in and do every product line and every possible customization that a customer can do, or should I start and kind of standardize my product a little bit more so that my customers can configure it, but it puts more guardrails on them? So it's just kind of the pros and cons that you have to weigh, and we're here to help you with that as well. So those are the kind of 5 questions I had, and I had a question in there. Are there any more questions I can answer while I'm on the call? Feel free to drop them in the question and answer. We can wait a couple minutes for that. But if there's nothing else, that's pretty much all I had. We're
Austin.
always happy to help here at KETIV. If there's any additional questions you have or things like that, our team and myself, we're always happy to help and figure out if something like CPQ is a good fit. So, yeah, thank you for joining. It doesn't look like we have any more questions. So, but feel free to send us an email afterwards if there's anything specific that you didn't get to answer. But yeah, that's all I have today. Thank you all.
Thanks, Austin. I appreciate your time. Yeah, and I think we're talking a lot about the product and these constraints, and it sounds somewhat impersonal. I think sometimes we forget about the people element. I mean, you talked about all the time savings out of an engineer's day. We also didn't touch on it too much, but all the time savings in a salesperson's day and all that communication back and forth, right? I've worked with these customers too, and I know there were literal napkin drawings going back and forth, right? And it drives engineers crazy to have to deal with those as inputs. You have to extrapolate and infer so much, right? So I think it just makes life easier, which it opens up time for that innovation in engineering, right? Because like you said, you can work on that enhancing engineering rather
Mhm.
than transactional engineering to get the next customer taken care of. You can create the next best product. So it
And
really
you can start
created
to, it's great because, and you can start to open up visibility to management and leadership on what you're selling as well. So you can hook it up to, some business intelligence and things like that. It's a really good point. I didn't spend a lot of time on the sales rep, but yeah, even on the sales side and the management and executive side, you can start to hook up different things because you're collecting your data in your sales. And there's been a lot of customers I've worked with who just really didn't have a great idea of the products they were selling, meaning like, what are the configurations that they're selling the most often. And after implementing this, I've had customers, implement some business intelligence and be able to see, okay, we're selling a lot of this product. We need to really focus in on innovating a little bit more on this one, or let's leave it alone. Let's innovate over here. So just it helps the executives have direction as well.